I'm Cliff Ashford from Monash University. I look after the education research space. I look after the BI space, which means the previous presentations about BI were very interesting, and the virtual reality space as well, which we kicked off a few months ago. All of this is inside the ICT function, e-solutions at AUT. That's not AUT, that's my old university, at Monash. That's a terrible slip. Monash, here's the standard slide that we have to put up to say Monash is very big, we're all over the place. The reason that I really put this one up is because I will come back to mention Malaysia at some point in the presentation. Okay, it's late on a Tuesday afternoon. Does anyone know what they're doing? Okay, you won't get the prize in that case. What this is virtual reality training of welding. And one of the weird things about this is it's cheaper than using real welding trainers, but it's also better. Because you're using VR, you get all sorts of handy feedback about it, about how fast you're going and how hot it is and all these sorts of bits and pieces. So it's used a lot of the time now. This has been around for 10 years. This isn't new. But I want you to hold that in mind because what we're doing with assessment at Monash isn't just about sort of replacing paper exams with an electronic version, just nothing else. The idea is to do something a lot closer to that, and I'll get to that a bit as we run through the presentation. Okay. Will this play? Please play. See, this worked, didn't it, when you tested it? Can you guys click that to make it work? Yes. Do we have sound? Sound comes in a second, don't worry. I can click through it and carry on to other stuff if it's not going to work. Why do I do video like this? Sound never works. 360,000 exams. 8.5 million sheets of paper. A lot of trees. This was our original justification for why we were doing this project, because we use a lot of paper. It's not just cutting down lots of trees, it's also highly sort of inefficient. There's a massive sort of process of moving chunks of dead tree about. This is Chris Ryan, who I work with on the educational side, who would be saying something fascinating. You can go into YouTube and hear all about this. I'm sure we'll have a link after the fact. Chris is explaining why it's a bad idea to do paper. This is, who knows anything about running exams at universities? I was with all of you about a year and a half ago. I knew nothing apart from when I was at university, I sat some exams long, long, long time ago. The process is this sort of thing. There's a creation process where the academics go through and find ways of testing people to see whether or not they can test their knowledge of an academic subject. There's the staging process, which is huge, preparation for exams. Those 360,000 exams, that means you're running something like 4,000 exams at the same time. When I kicked off this project, I'm usually not bothered about things. We went to the venue where we did this and we looked at a sea of students sitting at tiny little desks, all scribbling on bits of paper. It was horrifying. That sitting process where they go through it, you're trying to make sure that they're not stressed, they're not cheating, they're all doing the process properly. It's a huge organizational structure. And then the final part that no one thinks about is marking is a monstrous process you have to do as well. So all the academics have to get together and mark all these exams, not losing any in the process, making sure that they'll be fair in the marking and there's no mistakes in the process, making sure that they can do multiple marking to sort of cover off any skew or sort of bias. All of these things are part of the process that you have to take account of. It's not just about running a sort of survey tool for a lot of students. The things we had lots of paper. It was error prone. There is a horrible story of one of our senior academics, because you move about these paper exams in literally bin bags of exams. And one of them was arranging his office and put it on top of the nearest sort of shelf that he had next to him, which was his bin. And he forgot to move it off by the morning, and the sort of cleanup staff came in, looked at something on top of the bin, thought it was recycling, and shredded 40 exam papers. If you have academics in the room, they all wince and look really unhappy at this point. Analytics, we say manual analytics, they were pretty much non-existent. There's a bunch of Excel stuff going on. Authenticity is what you can manage to put on a piece of paper that somebody can respond with a pen. That's about as authentic as it gets. And the student experience is this big room full of rustling paper. It's not very 21st century. And it's a bit embarrassing for a university like Monash when students come out of schools and they've had a more advanced experience in school than they had at the university. It's a three-part program of work because I believe collaboration makes big programs work. So we've got me up the top, we've got Chris Ryan down the bottom, who's the Pro Vice Chancellor of Education, and we've got Vern Garth, the calmest man in the world, who actually manages the big exam sessions. He needs to be calm because when you have 1,000 students starting to panic, the last thing you want to do is panic as well at the same time. The concept of this was we all looked after our area, but we could all veto each other if we felt the risk profile was getting too high at any point. We don't want to end up in the newspapers from doing this, but we do want to push it out as fast as possible to university because it transforms the university. So we're balancing along that line to make sure that we keep just on the right side of dangerous. Please tell me this is going to click. Yes, good. I missed one. Look, this, you'll see another picture of this later. This is Caulfield Racecourse. If you know Melbourne, this is a large racecourse. That is the primary stand, and we took this wraparound photograph of a bunch of people at the team from that was semester one. That floor takes about 1,000 students in little desks, and that's the invigilators, the IT staff, everybody else who was there right at the end of it. When they're finally relieved at the end of 2.5 weeks, this all worked. Okay, we started this in 2015, long before I came to Monash. I came to Monash at the end of 2017. All universities are toying with doing this. Everyone's looking at it. Everybody's putting it in and trying it in various areas, in a faculty or various units. We looked at it back then. We did a pilot. We didn't proceed with it. 2017, we did a formal market scan again, saying the industry must have matured over those 2 years. It's probably ready for us. This is where I came on the scene at the end of the process. We looked at this and said, what are we trying to do? Are we just trying to get rid of paper? Or are we trying to do something more extravagant for the university? We decided extravagant was what we were going to do, and so we dived into this by essentially saying, we're going to do this ourselves. There's an argument that the core business of a university is assessment. It's not teaching, it's not research, it's not sort of running the building trade by putting lots of buildings up. It's not about running cafes, it's about assessing. That's what we're licensed by the government to do, is to assess students and make sure they've reached a certain standard. So we felt that we should have our destiny in our own hands, and we'd do this ourselves. To do that, we decided to build a system on top of our learning management system, which is Moodle. It could have been any learning management system, happens to be Moodle. We'd build on top of that as a core sort of point, and everything else would come off that. It's like an integration hub, almost. Okay. Scale. How long we got? Okay, we got time. So, our initial start at the end of semester one last year was 0.5% of all our exams. We got some very brave academics who decided to come on board with us and use our new system that we pulled together. We did 600 seats, and that was it. We used in our latest building at the university, which is a learning and teaching building, which is a very lovely building, all very shiny. We decided to do it in that building because we figured that would have the best Wi-Fi of the entire university because we just built it. We discovered that running even 600 seats in multiple rooms is very hard to look after to make sure it works. And we also discovered just because your Wi-Fi is new doesn't mean it's the best. What it meant was they turned everything up to maximum because that's obviously better, isn't it? All the Wi-Fi was interfering with each other, which is fine on a daily basis. When you try and get density, like we're trying to do with this, as if we had this audience and everybody was doing an assessment at the same time, that doesn't work very well at all. So we had to retune the whole Wi-Fi just to make it work in that building. But semester two, we went bigger. These circles are all perfectly correct, by the way. I went to a great deal of trouble in Excel to make sure they're exactly the right size. So semester two, we did 10,000 seats. So we used one of our major sports hall, we put lots of little desks in, and we put a custom Wi-Fi installation into that space, as well as wiring every single desk for power and for network. We want the Wi-Fi to work because we're going to need to go BYOD. You can't do wired network for BYOD. When we did this, we have little icons here. I thank Tim for this because he suggested this. we had our laptops. So we decided not to go BYOD just now because we had no policy in place. We just buy laptops for enough for the students to go in here. We had our paper backup because if it went wrong, again, we don't want to be in the papers. We want to make sure that we can just slap out some exam papers and we're good. We put power in, we put network in, we put Wi-Fi in. And we put the Wi-Fi in just to prove that it would work. And for a couple of sessions, we unplugged all the wired cables and we just ran the Wi-Fi to make sure the whole concept was all right. It all worked, went really well. So we went bigger. Semester 1 this year, we hit 30% of all exams. Slight change in what we did. In this, we had wired, but we didn't use the wired. We had it there as a backup, and we ran Wi-Fi for the whole lot. We still had power. We still had our laptops. By this time, we had 1,500 laptops. We still had a paper backup we printed out, but we did BYOD as well. We had to prove BYOD to make sure that we could expand in the future. I'm not buying enough laptops for every student in the university to sit exams. So we ran a major floor with 1,000 of our machines on it, and another floor with 250 seats for BYOD. So we just ran through that. That successfully went through the process, and it proved that we could do things at scale. Semester 2, oh, that clicked onto the last one, the big reveal, look at that. Does it go back? Yeah. 34%, we're going to hit 43,000 seats for semester 2 this year. And you can look at that, the icons have changed slightly, little bits of things have happened. We're dropping the paper backup for the first time because we're confident the system works. We're also introducing a hybrid approach to a situation where you have to draw something. Some things inherently have to be drawn, like if you're working through a long proof or you have to draw an architectural diagram. Some things just don't work electronically. So we have a hybrid thing with a paper solution that we collect. And we also have video that we've always been able to do, but we didn't put it in because we wanted to sort of peel off one risk at a time from this approach. So we're enabling the video now, and we can have video questions in there. Silent video, we're not doing the satellite, the one we had earlier, actually. Silent video because we don't want to have to roll out headphones or anything else just now. That's another BYOD issue we want to work through. And then the current plan is, at the end of next year, semester 2 next year, we hit the 100,000 seats. So we do about 120, 130,000 seats per semester. So we hope to hit 100,000 at the end of next year. That should be, you'll see the difference there, what's dropped. That's entirely BYOD by that point, if this all works, which means putting a BYOD policy in place for the university and all sorts of other fun and games. Okay. So, things it had to be. It had to be, as you saw, scalable. Has to be equitable. We don't want to disadvantage anyone from this. There's already a question about moving across from paper to typing. I don't type very fast, you're disadvantaging me. The flip side we find was actually the case. Most people don't write fast these days. Nobody writes for hours at a time. Generally, people grew up learning to type. We also, our VC is very, very specific about the fact we're not doing pocket solutions for the university. We're doing this for all of Monash. So it has to hit all of our 10 faculties. We've got to do a bit of everything in here. Outcome focused, because this isn't just about replacing things, it's about trying to improve what we're doing and give us more options. Evidence-based, my background is business intelligence. We built this from the ground up. We're collecting all the data out of it so we can understand what's happening through preparation, through sitting, through marking, through every other thing that's happening through the exam. And independently assessed and audited to make sure we're not just fooling ourselves about how we're doing this. It is actually better for our students. Okay, how do we afford it? Paper exams with wonderful long essays where people sit there and go, oh, I forgot this idea just now. I need to have it down here. Scroll the stuff out, getting more and more panicky towards the end of the exam. Tons of those. We just looked at the cost of those, nothing else. We didn't look at the fact that multiple choice questions are auto-marked and all sorts of other clever things that we can do on the side, just the essay questions. You go through the international literature on this, you can mark questions like that roughly twice as fast as you can mark the scrolls. You get better formed arguments, you can just read the writing, all the rest of it. If you can do that, considering the number that we have, if we looked at our 80% of exams and we moved everything, we moved 80% across, not 100%, because the last 20% is hard to do, we get conservatively $7 million a year saving at the university. We pull in people just to mark student scroll. It's highly expensive, Also highly ineffective. We discovered now that students actually put together better arguments like this in the essays, because we've had a lot of experience in the last 2 semesters. Here, they were just stream of consciousness, just trying to get something down. So that was handy, because that helped convince the senior leadership that they should let us do this in the first place. Here's another one that I put on. We were asked how much we're investing in developing. We're not a development shop, we're a university. We're not here to write software. So my argument is we're not writing software, we're configuring a platform, and we're using lots of other building blocks to build a solution for the university. So I had my guys compare the costs of what we've done over the last 2 years compared to if we'd adopted one of the major industry's platforms for doing this. It pretty much tracks. That's that sort of end of year bit when you fiddle about with the budgets on either side of the end of the year, so don't worry about that too much. But they pretty much track at the same rate as they're climbing up there. I'm not giving you the real dollars, but if you buy me a beer, I might tell you later on. The difference, of course, is that we've now built a capability. This is bespoke for the university. We can add all sorts of new stuff in here, which I'll talk about in a bit, which you couldn't do with an off-the-shelf because we have control of the backlog. Plus, we are no longer charging per unit, which is what any of the industry solutions would do. That carries on up forever out of the roof of the building. So we can actually see how much we're going to spend in the future on this, which makes everyone a lot calmer about it, that we haven't just splurged money on something, we've actually saved money just in the future. It's an agile project. Every project's agile these days. It's as lean as possible. We put a lot more people in than we needed, and then we're stripping them back bit by bit as we sort out our business process, because running electronic exams is wildly different from running paper exams. And we're working through that process. Not least because most invigilators are in their 60s and 70s and are not terribly familiar with computers. And when they're trying to help students with a problem, it's not ideal to have someone who thinks that they should turn it off and on again. So we try to deal with all these various things. We're trying to make sure it's scalable, that we measure everything as we go, it's sustainable. We haven't actually measured how much, we're not cutting down trees, but we are burning electricity with Amazon. So I haven't actually done that calculation yet. We'll have to do that at some point. That's the closest thing I'm going to give you to an architecture diagram. If you want architecture, we can have that conversation separately. But we have AWS underneath all of this, of course, which is why we're here. Our LMS is Moodle, which sits on top of there. It's a cut-down version of Moodle. We stripped all the functionality out of it, apart from the assessment functionality. Catalyst, our managed service partner, is Andrew here somewhere? If Andrew's around, he's around at the event somewhere. They essentially look after the managed services, make sure it works. There's my 1,500 laptops that are about to change into BYOD for next year. We're on Okta too. Everybody seems to run Okta these days. And this is the Safe Exam Browser logo, because to make sure students aren't cheating, you need to lock the environment so that they can't go on the internet and they can't stick a USB slot in or anything else. So Okta essentially does that. It's a consortium of European tertiaries and organizations, of which we're a member now. Okay, this is another one we just need to be aware of. It comes back to the AWS stuff. This is a very, very peaky load. So that's an average sort of semester we're looking at as we go through the weeks. Academic on the bottom. Academics are just like students. Academics leave things to the last minute as well when preparing the exam. Students come in. This one, this weird spike, that's deferred. We just went through that because you have the exam period and then you have the deferred exam afterwards. We have 3 weeks of exams that sort of tail off because we have to do the big ones at the start. As you come through this, there's different workloads taking place. But what you can't see on this is we also do in-semester stuff as well. I didn't intend to do that in the project, it just happened to us. So we also support the in-semester assessments. That gives you a really peaky load. And also, we didn't actually have any notification of when that was happening. We can scale our environment for this. We couldn't scale the peaky load, so we're trying to get some sort of process where academics tell us when they're going to run these things, which should help. If Andrew was here, he would have told you that that load there, we dialed AWS up to 11 to make this work, to make sure there was no possibility of any performance issue when we had our 1,500 students hit the system simultaneously. I believe the stat he gave me was that we were using more AWS power, if you like, because a lot of variety of things going in there, than all the rest of their Moodle implementations in Australia at the time. mainly because we wanted this to work perfectly for that period and didn't want any. We probably doubled what we should have done. We will dial it back in the future, but we're never going to risk student behavior. We're happy to burn the money on that at the time. Okay, this is actually the system, and this is, if you look up there, that should be playing. Is it playing? Yes, it is. So that's ticking down. That's the clock that tells the students how long they got to go in the exam. And this is my clever video that I can put up because it means I can talk to this as long as possible, and then I can sort of balance the length of the presentation. So this is Moodle. If you're familiar with Moodle, it shouldn't look very familiar because we've reskinned the whole thing. We tried to remove a lot of the noise from it. We tried to make it as stress-free as possible for the students. We put in various things like this, which is highlighting, because our first cohort was mainly the law faculty, and they do a lot of sort of highlighting stuff in documents. As you can see, they can do things like mark questions as unsure, and they can answer lots of questions. This is one of my staff answering questions in a humorous fashion, if you look for what he puts in. So it's Moodle, but not quite as you know it. It's got things like this in here because we wanted this to be accessible, so that allows you to change the color scheme for different types of color blindness, for example. This up here gives you an overview of where you are from a student's point of view, and if I was to let this whole thing play out, you'll see there's a summary page at the end that lets the student go and see which ones they're unsure of, which ones they want to go back and look at later, any they've missed. The biggest horror in these things is clearly missing a question, when you could have got a few more marks and scraped yourself over the line to do this. This is the core of the platform. This is not what it's all about. This is Moodle to get us that first step and get us off paper. There's only 6 question types in this. There's only, if I could remember them all, it's multiple choice. It's things like fill in the blanks there. There's drag a label onto a dinosaur. There's short form answers, and there's long essay answers. The reason being, this is a step on the way to educate the university about where we want to go with assessment. We don't want to run assessment by survey tool, which is what this feels like. We want to run assessment in a way that is the same fashion as the students are being taught and how the students will do their job when they join industry. This is a hub to tie things to. Where are we up to? See if it goes a little bit further. This will all be available as well, this presentation, I believe. Okay. Now we'll give you some cool sort of stats and things. That's actually a picture of one of the switches. So we had to build a whole network infrastructure to run this. And we built it here. If you know Melbourne again, like I said, this is Caulfield Racecourse. So there is our Caulfield campus. There's Caulfield Racecourse. We had to plumb them together. We're multiply redundant on every single thing we do on this, so that's 2 dark fiber connections, and we went, we'll put in a microwave link as well, just in case somebody digs up the fiber cables and we lose our connectivity. Annoyingly, as soon as we did this, Caulfield said, we want to renovate, and we're going to pull the whole building down in a year's time, which was, I will not tell you how much I spent on this, but it's never tell network engineers you don't care about the cost, because they don't either if that happens. But we do have a very good network in there. Stats, 56 kilometers network cable, $80,000 of patch leads alone. We put in 60 video cameras because not only do we want to make sure the students weren't cheating, we also had $2 million worth of laptops sitting on small tables in Caulfield Racecourse. We didn't want anyone stealing them. We had 850 meters of cable ties, which the cleaners refused to pick up after the session because our guys had just clipped them all off and left the entire floor covered in cable ties. Those dark fiber connections and 40 trolleys of laptops, so that's 1,500 laptops. So Hewlett-Packard are very, very happy with me just now. I'm expecting a holiday from them or something. The response, okay. At every single session, there's an optional survey that pops up after you finish the exam. So the students can fill in that survey, and we build it up over time, and over the 2.5 weeks of the exams, these are the questions that we asked. How was the hardware? What was the interface like? Benefits of in-question software features, because we got lots of extra features we've added in. Importance of handwriting and note-taking, because we do dish out paper so people can take notes on the side. One of the key ones is exams are less stressful than paper. E-exams are less stressful than paper exams. The first exam, this was exactly the other way around. We had about 60% were more stressed about electronic exams, and about 40% were sort of okay with them. That flipped throughout the period, because even though we've only done 30% of the exams, that's hitting a high proportion of all the students at university. Most people had more than one exam, and they started to get more sort of used to the system. Sittings up there, 34,500. That's in Melbourne. There's another 3,000 we sat in Malaysia, synchronized at the same time, hence the conversation about the map at the start. So we wanted equity. We have our Malaysia campus. We have a commitment that the education at the Malaysia campus should be exactly the same as the education at Monash. That's challenging to achieve, but one thing through this project, at least we could make sure that when people were assessed through the platform, it was exactly the same experience in Malaysia and exactly the same time. Obviously, they were doing it later in the day, earlier in the day. Okay, and yeah, we got about 10,000 responses out of all these students. Okay, we did lots of focus groups. We're trying to make sure this is adopted around the university, so we want to appear open and transparent about everything that happens. So we do focus group after focus group after focus group. We talk to everybody. We've just done another round where we've been through about 7 of the faculties. We've got 3 faculties still to go. One of the big examples is that marking process where you have sacks of papers that are given to you and you take them off and you mark them at home. Any electronic system is better than having to do that. So that, even though in Moodle it's a bit clunky, it's better than doing it on paper, so most people are happy with it. Plus, you can start exactly when the exam finishes. And we were somewhat surprised that within seconds of the exams finishing, academics were coming in and starting to mark them, so clearly trying to get these things out of the way as soon as possible. We've actually put a sort of period, like an embargo of about half an hour, just to make sure we're happy with everything before we open it up to the academics to mark now. We didn't realize we'd have to do that until we saw the enthusiasm. We share lots of analytics, we share lots of all sorts of other information. This would be available to you afterwards, but this is generally what sort of good things. But marking usability, yep, it's rubbish at the moment. We're improving it. A question data bank is really important in terms of reusability of knowledge, but also in terms of long-term and longitudinal analytics. And different areas use question data banks differently. We have one, we want to improve it. And extended question functionality, we want to get beyond that sort of survey tool thing. Okay. This is one of our favorite responses because the best thing with anybody is when you win over a suspicious user. And the Associate Dean Education of Pharmacy was, yes, I'll try your spurious snake oil solution and I'll see if it works or not. And he did, and he loved it. It transformed the way he did his exams. He would never shift off this now. And in fact, the most grumpy academics we've met, we said, well, you don't have to carry on. You can come off this, and if you really don't think it's a good idea. But there's like, no, we're going to stay with it. Because if for no other reason than the marking is wonderfully better than doing it on paper. That's Azerbaijan. And I put that up because one of the most amusing things was a member of one of the faculties was saying, yes, I was sitting in the mountains in Azerbaijan using the internet and marking the exams while I was on holiday. And apparently the internet goes out all the time. It was actually cows, she said, ate the internet, but I thought goats was funnier, so I left it up there. Okay, that's in that learning and teaching building I told you about. A lot of student feedback. Students are real fans of this. They'd much rather use this than write on paper. There is that stress, that thing about the unknown. As soon as they've used that, they'd much prefer this. And they're quite surprised to come to university and find that we don't do this. So things are improving on that front. And we had students involved in a lot of the design of this to make sure they are happy. They were our primary customer because they're the ones under the most stress. End of semester exams are probably arguably a terrible idea. And one of the things about this process is to move away from that. If we can make it easy to run an exam at the end of the semester, we can make it easy to run an exam in a semester. If we can do that, then you can spread the examination load and no one gets quite so stressed. Okay, I put this one up. How are we doing? Got a little bit of time. Let's see how this works. So the idea is authenticity of exams. That idea of exams are close to what you're actually trying to do rather than some weird approximation on paper. Again, scale, because everything at Monash is about scale. Paper is weirdly relatively authentic because you can do all sorts of weird things on paper. We spent the last, I don't know, 1,000 years working out how to represent ideas on paper. It doesn't scale well, though. When you get up to the scales we've got, it gets really ugly, and yeah, you can lose exam papers. Laptops, quiz, that's what we did at the start. So quiz is the Moodle sort of functionality that we use to drive this. It's less authentic than paper in many ways. Paper can do other stuff. And also, with our laptops, it doesn't scale unless I happen to buy 5,000 laptops, which I'm not doing. Apart from anything else, laptops fail at those sorts of numbers. We take them out of the trolleys, and we find that a few more are broken, and we have to send them off. Network cards die all the time. Laptops with apps is where we're going. You saw that stuff previously about apps. What we want to do is deliver the students' actual applications into the assessment platform. So they're using SPSS, or they're using Excel, or they're using Word, or they're using ArcGIS in the actual assessment. Of course, it's still got our laptops, and it's slightly less scalable because that's a load on the servers. BYOD is where we're going to next year. BYOD with quiz is sort of where we'll be semester 1 next year. We're already doing a lot of it. We'll do a lot more of it, and it's very scalable, BYOD, once you get your processes in place. BYOD with apps is much better. It's much more authentic, and it's still pretty scalable. That's our primary sort of bulk solution for the university. And then you have a couple more coming in. So work integrated learning and OSCEs. OSCEs are the things they use in medicine a lot of the time, where they have actors come in and work with potential doctors to make sure they can diagnose illnesses. It's a very expensive thing to do. That's why it's so unscalable, because it costs a fortune. Students probably get 1 or 2 bites of the cherry of this. They don't get a chance to practice it. But it's amazingly authentic. We're going to try and approximate doing the same thing with VR and AR. So that's the 2021 major rollout. We're already trialing some of this stuff. We're going to bolt it into the platform for 2021. What that means is there's a sort of optimal thing that you want, from really authentic to pretty authentic, but scalable. And that's the sort of thing we're trying to match. So we're trying to get these various bits and pieces. This is a construction job to fill this in, to approximate this curve. So far, we've gone pretty well. We've done the scale quite well. We just have to put some more authenticity in, so that's for next year. This is some of the authenticity. That disgusting thing, can anyone tell what that is? Other end. This is a virtual reality trainer for those tubes they put down the esophagus and then put sort of cameras and tools down them. Apparently, with the first 100 times it's used on a human, it's considered training. So you should always ask that question, am I number 101 yet? Because you just get it slightly wrong and bad things happen. If you watch this all the way through, you get little squirts of blood coming out and all sorts of horrible stuff happens on it. These are some of the things that we want to be able to do. Obviously, putting Excel in, all our economics students will love this because Excel will be built in the platform. Obviously, engineering things, other bits and pieces. And honestly, no one writes computer code with a pen and paper. Our IT faculty, they want a full IDE for the students to be able to compile code, but they're happy just to be able to type stuff in just now rather than write stuff. So that's an absolute no-brainer that we're moving into. So a lot of these things are coming in next year, and the VR comes the year after. This is the big bugbear. Some things just need to be, there is nothing better than paper and pen or pencil for some disciplines. It's just the best technology in the world. If you're writing a long proof, or you're having to train to be able to describe on paper for legal purposes in engineering, to draw something quickly in a clear fashion, paper is the way to do it. We will always support paper. It's just we're going with pre-printed sheets and high-capacity scanners. We drop them in. It gets picked up on the back end with scripting. It gets scanned. It gets attached back into the main exam for marking. So we just have automation on the back end. There's some of your key numbers. So that's generally the growth that we've been through. Anything else? The core team's not large. It's a fairly small team. When you're running exams, there's a lot of people, and there's multiple shifts. We run 3 exams a day, so it goes late into the evening. Obviously, AWS is doing all the managed service hosting, along with Catalyst. Student experience, resilience, performance, all sorts of other stuff, but these were the things that we absolutely had to do. Caulfield Racecourse, 4,500 seats. We're trying to find another venue. Now they're closing for a few years. It's very hard to find 4,500 seats anywhere in Melbourne. We might have to build a building. We'll see. Let's have a look. That one worked. We flew a drone over the exam hall, just so you can get an idea of how big it is. Well, I asked if you got any questions. Yes. So say that one again. That was. So. Nope. So sometimes that exam hall is one unit at the university. We have some units that are actually too big for that exam hall with 1,300 students in them. Sometimes that exam hall, so between each session, sometimes it's got like 10 units taking place and they're different batches. And we send out the configurations to the machines by automation and you see the machines flicking over it, which is quite cool. In fact, you might even see that on this, some of the screens just changing as it flies along. So we orchestrate different areas of batches within that space through scripting, because there's an encryption key which goes to each machine to make sure that only that student can log on from that machine to that exam at a given time. That was a problem to solve in its own right. So you'll notice they face in different directions. And we tested that out to make sure that when that happened that you couldn't actually see it, you have to look two across to make it work. Any other questions? Oh, got a couple up here. I'll take the one up front first. So we already have auto-marking. So multiple choice questions are auto-marked, and the drag and drop questions, and they're all auto-marked out the box. Short form answers, we're about to roll in something there because that's a few words, and we know the rough words that need to go into most of these, so we can auto-mark those. The border conditions can then be presented up to the academic to say, we're not really sure about this one, we think it might be wrong, can you invigilate on this? The long form ones, we are looking at that as well. That's a much more challenging problem. Pretty much what we're looking at is AI-assisted marking, as opposed to saying, you've managed your 400-page essay, and it actually got over this concept in philosophy to people, so it's not going to be doing that. But it is looking for key things out of the grading rubric to make sure they're picked up at various areas and try and highlight them to the academic. Sort of culturally, Monash doesn't want to be in that place to say, you come and do law, and we will mark all your exams with AI and decide whether you're a good enough lawyer. I don't think that would go in terribly well with people, so we're not suggesting it just now. But it can certainly speed up the testing. Certainly can. So even the Excel stuff we're rolling in, we're already doing some small-scale stuff where you get an Excel data set, you build the stuff in it, and that's auto-marked through Excel. And we're doing that in other technologies as well. Yep, absolutely, yeah. And they're desperate to do it themselves. Couple, which, yep.
Have you had any failures during the exam?
We've had lots of learnings during the exam. Yes, we've had things happen. Thing is, when you had paper exams, things go wrong with paper exams anyway. There's all sorts of things. You're always dealing with situations. We had, because this runs in a web browser, essentially Moodle, when we very first put this out on that tiny scale at the start, we found there's a problem with students accidentally doing select all and then typing a space, and suddenly everything vanished, and they'd panic in the exam, and really they need to just go back. But then we went to the undo and redo stuff, and that didn't work very well in a browser, so we recoded that in JavaScript so that you got something that felt like Word for undo and redo. The trouble is, we discovered that some law exams have someone sitting in the same field for 3 hours just typing a response to a case study. And if someone's doing a lot of editing, that built up such a big buffer inside the JavaScript, we were starting to get freezing on it. And we didn't see that in any of the testing, because it's hard to mimic until it actually happened in reality. So we had to do something in that exam to say, look, every half an hour, just come out the field and go back into it, and it'll do it. It'll look after it. We have auto-save on these things, so it saves every 30 seconds, but that was just to sort of clear the undo buffer in the field to make sure it was okay. And it happened in a tiny percentage of cases, but students freak out when that happens with good reason. So we've since coded up a replacement fix to that. And when we move over to having Word embedded to do these things, it's no longer a problem. It's just a side effect of the fact it's all going through essentially a web browser at the moment. There are other things. I can tell you war stories. There's been all sorts of stuff that's happened, but we work through them one by one. Yes?
Yeah, I'm from the Australian Music Examination Board. This is really interesting for me. But it struck me that there must be a large human cost. So you saved $7 million in marketing, and you said you mentioned you bring those people in. So was there a big, how does that communicate? How was that received by that group?
Okay. That figure is a very interesting figure. If you're familiar with universities, there's a difference between central and faculty. We might be saving the 10 faculties $7 million collectively. There is no way I can get my hands on that $7 million. So this has freed up $7 million worth of funding in the faculties to spend on whatever they want, which might be more research, or it might be people to do other business processes that are being neglected. It could be a whole variety of things, or even just typing up the sort of questions into Moodle to take the pressure off the academics so they can get on with more sort of teaching or research. So this stuff will really just bleed back into the budgets, I think. But it is $7 million of a work that's not very high value work that can be replaced with higher value work.
So those markers, were they upset by this?
So none of them have been, these are sessional staff that are brought in. So what it would mean is we're bringing in fewer sessional staff. So no one's been fired as a side effect of it, is the gist of it. Yes?
So you were talking about potentially using BYOD devices for this. How is there any controls that you've been able to put in place to mitigate potential cheating?
Okay. So BYOD has a lot of angles to it. The only reason we could do any BYOD at all was because one of our faculties has a de facto BYOD policy. In reality, the faculties can't have policies at all because all policies are centrally governed by the university, but they sort of had this one that they did, where they were essentially telling all their students, you must have a laptop and here's a minimum standard. Because it was sort of de facto, the minimum standard wasn't well adhered to, so a lot of students have really dodgy old things handed down to them by their older siblings or whatever else. Plus, a whole bunch of them came in with Chromebooks as well, which this does not support because this has to be a Mac or a Windows device. What we do with Safe Exam Browser is Safe Exam Browser has to be installed on the student's own device. So that's a process we go through. Safe Exam Browser also gets updated multiple times a year because there's an arms race between hacking and the anti-hacking that takes place on a browser like that. So we make sure they have the right version, and we can check the version from the back end. And then the encryption keys are distributed right at the start of the exam. So we log it in from that point of view, and we confirm the machine is locked down. The only weird situation we've had so far is that one of the BYOD students finished his paper like you normally would and got up and walked out like you normally would with his laptop. And the invigilator staff, it didn't occur to them to stop him because that's just what you did on paper. And we suddenly realized what had happened, and we had to go and check that he wasn't sitting outside having a coffee carrying on the exam because he hadn't signed out in the exam. So we checked, and it wasn't, and we signed him out. But there are business processes that you have to put in place to handle this that you keep getting taken by surprise because there's things we never thought of. And we spent a long time trying to think of every possible thing that could happen, and we get multiple surprises every time we do a round of this. But we have so many mitigations in place, we pretty much survived everything that happens because we got plans on plans on plans on plans on plans. Does that cover it? Yeah. And like I say, this thing, you can go two ways with assessment. You can either rely on the network or not. The not rely on network is you download everything to the machine, and if the network goes out, you can run it and then upload the answers at some point in the future. Or you can say networks are good these days, and rely on the network being there, which is why we do the 30-second upload. So if a student's device dies, which the BYOD devices do all the time, we grab their device, we slap in one of ours, they open it up, they log back in, and they're straight back into where they left off. We don't warn the students of this, because if we tell them they'll get a device if their device doesn't work, they don't bring their own device. Because I forgot it, sorry, can I have one of your devices, because it's less risk to them. So we tell them during the exam, not beforehand, because it drives all the wrong behaviors. Yes?
Have you ever dealt with audio and video assessment?
Okay, in this, yeah. So we can deliver all of these, but we chose not to initially, because we wanted to minimize the variables of what we were doing. So video goes live in semester 2 this year. Audio, the question is, I've got 1,500 laptops, do I buy 2,000 sets of disposable or cleansable sort of airline headphones? Or on BYOD, is it bring your own device and your own headphones? Is that the deal? And these sorts of things, and some of these are just logistic things to work through. What's the best way of doing this? So the platform's perfectly capable of delivering it. The Wi-Fi we put in, we can deliver HD to every single one of the 1,000 seats successfully, even if they all do it at the same time. So we overscaled this by far. Yes? So every university is doing some sort of e-exams. We're doing it at the largest scale, as far as I'm aware. When we did our international search, the leaders in the field were in Scandinavia because they had a student revolt there where the students all got together and refused to do paper exams anymore. And the government got involved and said, right, you guys are all moving. So I think there's 3 different e-exam companies got spawned in Scandinavia as a side effect of it because there was such a demand to do this. When we spoke to them a year and a half ago, the scale they were doing was the scale we're now doing. And they were at sort of 80% of their student load. We're much bigger at Monash. If we get to 80%, we're much, much larger than anybody else. You need to go to China or India to get bigger sort of scale in that situation. But the whole solution scales very, very well. That's the beauty of using AWS and the cloud in the back end. We can dial it to any side we want, and it's a linear sort of progression. So that's worked well. But it's scary. The first time I walked in that exam hall, in fact, before every new session, I stand there with my heart in my mouth watching 1,000 students log onto a machine. And if it goes wrong, it's very ugly very quickly. So I can understand why people are hesitant about doing it at scale. Yes?
You said it's a core capability, but how are you going to sell this product?
Okay. That's an interesting one, because this is something we're building out of bits and pieces. So universities always think about selling the products because they suddenly think they're the most commercial thing in the world. If we were going to sell it, it would be a SaaS solution. We'd host it, and because there's so many components to it, it's hard to sort of give that. You need to put all those bits and pieces together. But the trouble is, even if you buy the SaaS solution, there's a huge amount of work you have to do in the university just to be able to deliver these sorts of things. There's business processes changes. There's the whole process of how you develop the exams with the academics. There's the venues in which you do this. The actual software component, it's hard as hell, but it's probably about 30% of the whole thing. There's 70% of it which is just moving a big sort of change-averse, risk-averse organization to pick this stuff up, which is huge in its own right. But we have learned most of the lessons from that. We have all the sort of risk models. We have the communication models. We have all the things to help people do that. So there is a possibility of that. That is being bandied about at the university, of course.